The heavy oak gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot through the crowded courtroom. For a second, there was dead silence. Then, a scream tore through the air, a sound so piercing it made the bailiffs flinch. It didn't come from the grieving widow in the front row, wearing a $10,000 veil. It came from the mistress who thought she had won it all. She lunged at the judge, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at the air, screaming, "That's a lie! He promised me everything!" But the woman, standing quietly in the back, holding the hands of two twin boys in worn-out sneakers, knew the truth. The game was over. But to understand why the mistress screamed, you have to know how the abandoned wife survived the hell that came before. The radiator in apartment 4B rattled, coughed, and then died completely. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the sound of freezing to death in a Chicago January. Charlotte Sterling pulled the threadbare wool blanket tighter around the small shapes of her 6-year-old twins, Leo and Sam. They were sleeping on a mattress pushed into the corner of the living room, the only room in the apartment that stayed remotely warm, thanks to the heat rising from the bakery downstairs. But tonight, even the bakery ovens were off. Charlotte looked at her breath misting in the air. She rubbed her hands together, her knuckles raw and cracked from her shift washing dishes at O'Malley's diner. 3 years. It had been 3 years since her life had been ripped apart, shredded like a relentless paper shredder. She walked to the window, looking out at the slush-covered streets of the South Side. A stark contrast to the view she used to have. 3 years ago, she would have been looking out at the sparkling lights of Lake Michigan from a penthouse on the Magnificent Mile. She would have been sipping vintage Pinot Noir, waiting for her husband, Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Tech, to come home. But Marcus wasn't coming home. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The day she found the lipstick on his collar wasn't the day it ended. It was the day she found the bank transfers. Millions of dollars moved into an account under the name Jessica Vane. When she confronted him, Marcus hadn't denied it. He had laughed. He told her she was boring. He told her she had lost her spark after the twins were born. He told her Jessica, his 24-year-old personal assistant, made him feel like a king. Then came the lawyers. Marcus had the best legal team in the city. They painted Charlotte as mentally unstable, an unfit mother. They drained the joint accounts. They used loopholes in the prenup she had foolishly signed at 22, blinded by love. She was left with a peak kill. Pittance, a small settlement that vanished within a year due to Leo's asthma treatments and the cost of living. Now, she was 3 days late on rent. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The landlord. Mr. Henderson wasn't a bad man, but he ran a business, not a charity. Charlotte smoothed her hair, checked that the boys were still asleep, and opened the door a crack. It wasn't Mr. Henderson. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a man in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Charlotte made in a year. He held a leather briefcase and looked out of place among the peeling paint and smell of boiled cabbage. "Mrs. Charlotte Sterling?" the man asked. His voice was professional, devoid of emotion. "I go by Charlotte Miller now," she whispered, stepping into the hall and closing the door behind her so the cold draft wouldn't hit the boys. "Who are you?" "I am Arthur Pendleton, senior partner at Pendleton, Cray & Associates. I represent the estate of Marcus Sterling." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "The estate? Is Marcus?" "Mr. Sterling passed away 3 days ago, ma'am. A massive cardiac arrest while vacationing in Saint-Tropez." Charlotte felt a strange hollowness. No tears. No grief. Just a dull shock. The father of her children was dead. "I'm here to serve you notice," Pendleton continued, pulling a thick cream-colored envelope from his jacket. "The reading of the last will and testament is scheduled for this Friday at 9 a.m. at the Cook County Probate Court. Judge Harrison Thorne will be presiding due to the sensitive nature of the assets." Charlotte looked at the envelope. "Why am I invited? Marcus made it very clear I was nothing to him. I'm sure Jessica has inherited the earth." Pendleton's eyes flickered. For a brief second, the professional mask slipped, revealing a glint of something. Pity? Or perhaps amusement? "The will is complex, Mrs. Sterling. Your presence is mandatory. If you do not appear, you forfeit any potential claim on behalf of the minors, Leo and Samuel Sterling. He handed her the envelope. It felt heavy. Also, Pendleton added, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch. Mr. Sterling left specific instructions that this was to be given to you immediately upon the notification of his death. Charlotte took the pouch. Her trembling fingers undid the drawstring. She tipped it into her palm. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't cash. It was a rusted iron key. It looked like something from the 19th century, heavy, with an intricate, skull-shaped head. "What is this?" she asked. "I do not know," Pendleton said. "But he said you would remember." He turned to leave, his shoes clicking on the linoleum. 9 a.m., Mrs. Sterling. Don't be late. Vane will certainly be there. Charlotte stood alone in the hallway, clutching the rusted key. She didn't remember this key. She had never seen it in her life. But as she looked at it, a cold resolve hardened in her stomach. Marcus was dead. Jessica was likely celebrating. But Charlotte had the twins to think about. If there was even a 1% chance that Marcus had left a single penny for his sons, she would walk through fire to get it. She went back inside, looked at her sleeping boys, and whispered, "We're going to get what's yours." Friday morning brought a sleet storm that turned Chicago into a gray blur. Charlotte had spent her last $40 on a babysitter for the morning, a kind neighbor named Mrs. Gable, because she refused to drag the boys into the toxicity of that courtroom yet. Not until she knew what was happening. She wore her only suit, a black ensemble she had bought from a thrift store 2 days ago. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, but she had pinned it carefully. She pulled her hair back into a severe bun and wore no makeup. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to witness. The Cook County Probate Court was imposing, a cathedral of law and judgment. As Charlotte walked through the metal detectors, she felt the eyes of the curious on her. The death of Marcus Sterling was headline news. The tech mogul worth $3 billion, dead at 45. The tabloids were already speculating about the fortune. When she pushed open the doors to courtroom 304, the air changed. It smelled of expensive perfume and old wood. And there she was. Jessica Vane sat in the front row, surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers. She looked like a black widow spider dressed by Chanel. Her hat had a veil, but she had pulled it back to reveal a face that was perfectly made up to look tragically beautiful. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Charlotte walked down the center aisle. Her heels clicked rhythmically. Click, click, click. Jessica turned. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto Charlotte. The fake sadness evaporated instantly, replaced by a sneer of pure disgust. "What is she doing here?" Jessica hissed, loud enough for half the room to hear. She turned to her lead attorney, a shark named Richard Blight. "I told you to ensure the trash was taken out, Richard." Charlotte didn't stop until she reached the table on the left side of the room. She sat down, her back straight, ignoring the whispers from the gallery. "Mrs. Sterling." A deep voice boomed. Charlotte looked up. Judge Harrison Thorne sat on the bench. He was a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his glasses and looked at her. "Thank you for joining us." "I wouldn't miss it, Your Honor," Charlotte said softly. "You have no right to be here." Jessica stood up, her voice rising an octave. "Marcus divorced her. She's a leech. She's just here to try and steal my money." "Sit down, Miss Vane," Judge Thorne said, his voice low but dangerous. "This is a reading of a last will and testament, mandated by the court due to the contested nature of the assets and the involvement of minor children. If you speak out of turn again, I will have you removed, and your counsel will represent you in absentia." Jessica sat down, fuming, shooting daggers at Charlotte. Attorney Arthur Pendleton stood up from a separate table. He walked to the center of the room holding a sealed document. The red wax seal was still intact. "The document I hold," Pendleton announced, "was drafted by Marcus Sterling 6 months ago. It supersedes all previous wills, including the one drafted 3 years ago upon his divorce." Jessica stiffened. Charlotte saw her exchange a worried glance with Richard Blythe. They didn't know about a new will. "Let's proceed," the judge said. Pendleton broke the seal. The sound of the cracking wax was the only sound in the room. He unfolded the parchment. "I, Marcus Anthony Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Pendleton paused, looking over the rim of his glasses at Jessica. "First, regarding my real estate assets. To my fiancée, Jessica Vane." Jessica let out a breath she had been holding, a smug smile returning to her lips. She glanced back at the gallery as if posing for a photo. "I leave the Sterling estate in the Hamptons, the penthouse in Manhattan, and the villa in Tuscany." A murmur went through the crowd. That was easily $200 million in property alone. Jessica squeezed her lawyer's hand, beaming. "Furthermore," Pendleton continued, "I leave the entirety of my collection of vintage automobiles, valued at $50 million, to Jessica Vane." Jessica actually let out a small giggle. She looked at Charlotte, mouthing the word loser. Charlotte sat stoically. She hadn't expected anything for herself. But for the boys. Surely he left something for the boys. "To my ex-wife, Charlotte," Pendleton read. The room went silent. "Who stood by me when I had nothing, and whom I cast aside when I had everything." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the arrogant Marcus she remembered. This sounded like the man she had married 20 years ago. "I leave the contents of my personal safety deposit box number 404 at the First National Bank of Chicago. And I leave her the sum of—" Pendleton hesitated. He squinted at the paper. "The sum of $1. The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back row gasped. Jessica threw her head back and laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. $1! Oh, Marcus, you savage!" Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't the money. It was the final insult. $1. It was a slap in the face from beyond the grave. He wanted to humiliate her one last time. "Order! Order!" Judge Thorne banged his gavel. And finally, Pendleton raised his voice to be heard over the commotion. "Regarding the ownership of Sterling Tech, the patents, the liquid assets, and the remaining $2 billion in the trust." The room froze. This was the big prize. The houses were toys. The company was the empire. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes hungry. She was already counting the money. She was already planning the parties. "I hereby decree," Pendleton read, "that the entirety of the Sterling Tech shares and the controlling interest in the company shall be placed in a blind trust." He turned the page. His eyebrows shot up. "To be administered by the person who possesses the iron key." Silence. Absolute confused silence. The iron key? Jessica shrieked, standing up again. "What the hell is the iron key? I have the keys to the house. I have the keys to the Ferrari. Which key is he talking about?" Pendleton looked at Jessica calmly. "It is a specific item Mr. Sterling kept in his possession. He stated that the heir to the empire must present this key to the court at this precise moment to claim the inheritance. If the key is not presented, the assets will be liquidated and donated to the Cat Fanciers Association of America." "That's insane!" Jessica screamed. "He never gave me an iron key. He gave me diamonds. He gave me—" She dumped the contents of her purse onto the table. Lipstick, phone, credit cards, a modern car fob. No iron key. She turned to her lawyer. "Do something. This is a trick." Pendleton looked around the room. Does anyone present have the key described as the iron key? Charlotte's hand was trembling in her pocket. She felt the cold, rough metal against her palm. The rusty thing Pendleton had given her in the hallway. He said you would remember. But she didn't remember. Why would he give it to her? Was this a trap? If she produced it, would Jessica sue her? Would they say she stole it? She looked at Jessica, whose face was twisted into a mask of greed and panic. She thought of Leo's cough. She thought of the cold radiator. She thought of the eviction notice. Charlotte stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I have it," she said. Her voice was shaking, but clear. Every head in the room swiveled toward her. Jessica's eyes went wide, her jaw dropping. "You," Jessica laughed nervously. "You? You live in a dump? How would you have the key?" Charlotte reached into her pocket and pulled out the rusted, skull-headed key. She held it up. Under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom, it didn't look like junk anymore. It looked like a weapon. Pendleton nodded solemnly. "Bailiff, please bring the key to the bench for verification." A bailiff took the key from Charlotte and walked it to the judge. Judge Thorne took a magnifying glass and examined the head of the key. He compared it to a photo attached to the will. "The key appears to be authentic," the judge ruled. "No," Jessica screamed. "She stole it! She must have stolen it from his pockets when he— No, she wasn't there. She bribed someone. That key belongs to me." "However," Pendleton interrupted, his voice cutting through Jessica's hysteria, "there is a second condition." Charlotte froze. "Of course. There was always a catch. Possession of the key allows the bearer to unlock the inheritance," Pendleton read. "But to claim it, the bearer must answer a single question. A question only the true partner of my soul would know." Pendleton looked directly at Charlotte. "The question is, where did we eat our first meal as a married couple?" Charlotte blinked. Jessica looked frantic. She started whispering to her lawyer, "Check his calendar. Check the receipts. Was it the Ritz? Was it Paris?" Jessica shouted out, "It was Le Jules Verne in Paris. He told me he always went there for special occasions." Pendleton ignored her. He looked at Charlotte. "Mrs. Miller, do you have an answer?" Charlotte smiled. A sad, melancholic smile. It wasn't a fancy restaurant. It wasn't Paris. They had been broke back then. Marcus had just started his company in a garage. They had eloped because they couldn't afford a wedding. "It wasn't a restaurant," Charlotte said softly. "We had $5 between us. It was raining. We bought 2 hot dogs from a vendor on the corner of 5th and Main, and we ate them sitting on a park bench under a shared newspaper." The courtroom was silent. Pendleton looked at the document. He smiled. A genuine smile this time. "That is correct." "Objection!" Jessica screamed, overturning her chair. "That's a lie. Marcus Sterling would need a hot dog. He's a billionaire. This is a fraud. I am his fiancée. I am carrying his child." The room gasped again. This was the first time Jessica had mentioned a pregnancy. Charlotte looked at Jessica's stomach. It was flat. "I am pregnant!" Jessica sobbed, playing the victim card hard. "How can you leave his unborn child with nothing while giving everything to this woman?" Judge Thorne looked over his glasses. "Ms. Vane, if you are pregnant, that introduces a new heir to the estate. We will need to order a paternity test immediately." Well, it's too early for a test," Jessica stammered, her eyes darting around. "Actually," Pendleton said, flipping to the last page of the will. "Mr. Sterling anticipated this. Part 3 of the will addresses any potential offspring claimed by Ms. Jessica Vane." Jessica went pale. "What? What does it say?" Pendleton cleared his throat. "It says, if Jessica claims she is pregnant, play the video file labeled The Truth, located in the safety deposit box." "Video?" Jessica whispered. "Mrs. Miller," Pendleton said to Charlotte, "you have the key to box 404. Would you like us to retrieve the contents and play this video?" Charlotte looked at the key in her hand. Then she looked at Jessica. For the first time in 3 years, she saw fear in the mistress's eyes. Pure, unadulterated terror. "Yes," Charlotte said. "Open the box." The court officer rolled a large flat-screen monitor into the center of the courtroom. The silence was suffocating. The air conditioner hummed. but it did nothing to cool the heat of the tension radiating from the three disparate groups: the terrified mistress, the stoic widow, and the confused gallery. Arthur Pendleton plugged a USB drive, retrieved from box 404 moments ago by a court courier, into the side of the monitor. "The file is dated 2 weeks prior to Mr. Sterling's death," Pendleton announced. He pressed play. Static crackled for a second, and then the face of Marcus Sterling filled the screen. Charlotte gasped. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not really. She had seen photos in magazines where he looked vibrant and powerful, but the man on the screen looked haunted. His cheeks were sunken, his skin sallow. He sat in his study, a glass of scotch in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other, a habit he had quit when the twins were born. "Hello, everyone," the digital Marcus said, his voice raspy. "If you are watching this, I'm dead. Good riddance, right? I certainly haven't been a saint." He took a long drag of the cigarette and leaned into the camera lens. "Arthur, if you're playing this, it means Jessica Vane has claimed she is pregnant with my child to contest the will." On the screen, Marcus laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "Jessica, my dear, you always were predictable. You love money more than you love air. I knew you'd try to secure the bag for 18 years of child support." In the courtroom, Jessica was trembling. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Turn it off," she hissed. "He was on medication. He didn't know what he was saying." "Silence," Judge Thorne barked. The video continued. "Here's the truth," Marcus said, his eyes hardening. "I didn't die of a sudden heart attack. Well, maybe that's what the coroner said. But I've been dying for 2 years. Pancreatic cancer. I kept it quiet to keep the stock price up." Charlotte felt a tear slide down her cheek. He was dying, and he had been alone. Despite everything he did, the memory of the man she once loved ached in her chest. "Because of the aggressive chemotherapy I underwent 18 months ago," Marcus continued, "I am sterile, completely. My doctors, Dr. Aris and Dr. Wu at Northwestern Memorial, can provide the medical records. It is biologically impossible for me to father a child." The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just a murmur, it was a roar. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. "So," Marcus's voice cut through the noise, "if Jessica is pregnant, congratulations are in order, but the father isn't me." He paused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I have a hunch who the father is, though. Richard, are you in the room?" Richard Blight, Jessica's shark of a lawyer, froze. He stopped shuffling his papers. He looked up at the screen, his face draining of color. "I know about the late nights, Richard," Marcus said on the screen. "I know about the legal consultations at the Four Seasons. You two thought you were so clever, bleeding my accounts dry while I was too sick to notice. But I noticed. I saw everything." Marcus leaned back. "I let it happen. I let you steal the cash. I let you take the cars. Because I knew this moment would come. I wanted you to think you won, right up until the moment the gavel fell." You bastard!" Jessica screamed, turning on her lawyer. She began pummeling Richard's chest with her fists. "You told me he didn't know! You said we were safe!" "Get off me!" Richard shouted, shoving her away. "I didn't know about the cancer. I didn't know." "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Thorne was banging the gavel so hard it looked like the handle might snap. "Bailiffs, restrain Miss Vane!" 2 officers rushed forward, pulling a screaming Jessica away from her lawyer. Her hat had fallen off, her hair was a mess, and her mascara was running in black streaks down her face. On the screen, Marcus had one last thing to say. The camera zoomed in on his tired eyes. "Charlotte," he whispered. The courtroom quieted down, watching the screen. "I broke us," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I chased the glitter and lost the gold. I know I can't buy your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I know you. You're a fighter. You're the only one strong enough to fix what I broke. The company, Sterling Tech. It's rot, Charlotte. It's full of wolves. I'm leaving you the shares not as a gift, but as a weapon. Use the key. Clean house. Save the boys. I love ya. The video cut to black. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Jessica had stopped screaming, realizing the depth of her defeat. Judge Thorne cleared his throat. He looked visibly shaken. He adjusted his robe and looked down at the chaotic scene before him. In light of the evidence provided, the judge ruled, his voice booming, I am dismissing Ms. Vane's claim to the estate with prejudice. Furthermore, Mr. Pendleton, I am ordering an immediate freeze on Mr. Blight's assets, pending an investigation into fraud and embezzlement. Your Honor, you can't, Richard Blight stammered. I just did, Thorne said. Ms. Vane, Mr. Blight, get out of my courtroom before I hold you both in contempt. As the bailiffs escorted the disgraced pair out, flashing cameras blinding them as they exited, Arthur Pendleton walked over to Charlotte's table. He placed a thick folder in front of her. Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling, he said quietly. You are now the majority shareholder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Charlotte didn't look at the folder. She looked at the blank screen where her husband's face had been. She felt the heavy iron key in her pocket. He said the company is full of wolves, Charlotte said, her voice steady. It is, Pendleton agreed, and you're going to meet them on Monday morning. The transition from a freezing apartment to the helm of a global empire was violent. On Saturday, Charlotte and the boys moved out of the South Side. She didn't move into the penthouse. She couldn't bring herself to sleep in the bed Marcus had shared with Jessica. Instead, she checked them into a suite at the Peninsula Hotel. For the first time in years, Leo and Sam slept in beds that didn't sag, and they ate until they were full. But Charlotte didn't sleep. She spent the entire weekend reading. She read financial reports, shareholder summaries, and employee manifestos. She realized quickly what Marcus meant by rot. Sterling Tech was bleeding. The stock price was inflated by lies. The liquid assets were gone, likely funneled into offshore accounts by Richard Blight and Jessica over the last 2 years. The company had weeks, maybe a month, before it couldn't make payroll. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a hurricane. Charlotte stepped out of the black town car in front of the Sterling Tower, a 70-story needle of glass and steel in the heart of the loop. A crowd of paparazzi was waiting. Charlotte, is it true you are working as a dishwasher? Mrs. Sterling, are you selling the company? What do you have to say to the shareholders who are panicking? Charlotte ignored them. She wore a new suit, navy blue, sharp, tailored. She wore the iron key on a silver chain around her neck, visible for everyone to see. She held her head high, channeling every ounce of anger and determination she had built up over 3 years of poverty. She walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was silent. Hundreds of employees stopped what they were doing to stare. They didn't see a CEO. They saw the abandoned wife. She could feel their judgment. She doesn't belong here. She's a housewife. She's going to crash the plane. Arthur Pendleton met her at the elevator. The board is waiting in the executive conference room on the 70th floor. They are eager. Eager to eat me alive, Arthur? Charlotte asked as the elevator shot upward. Precisely, he replied. The chairman, Silas Thorne, no relation to the judge, is leading the charge. He wants you to liquidate. Sell the parts, take the cash, and walk away. And what happens to the employees? They lose their pensions. The company dissolves. Then we're not selling, Charlotte said as the doors opened. The 70th floor was a sanctuary of wealth. Deep carpets, original art on the walls, and a view of the lake that cost a fortune. Charlotte walked into the conference room. 12 men and 1 woman sat around a mahogany table that was longer than her old apartment. They were all older, all white, all dressed in suits that cost more than a car. They didn't stand up when she entered. Silas Thorne sat at the head of the table. He was a corpulent man, with eyes like beads of oil. He was smoking a cigar, defying the building's regulations. Well, Silas said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "The dishwasher queen arrives." A few of the board members chuckled. Charlotte walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. She didn't sit. She stood, placing her hands flat on the wood. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. "I assume you've all read the will." "We read it," Silas sneered, a romantic gesture from a dying man. "But let's be real, Mrs. Miller. I won't call you Sterling. You don't know the difference between a microchip and a potato chip. We have a buyer lined up. Omnicorp is willing to pay $40 a share. It's a generous exit strategy. You sign the papers, you take your payout, which will be substantial, and you go back to whatever it is you do, knitting." "I was a mathematician before I was a mother, Mr. Thorne," Charlotte said coldly, "and for the last 3 years I was a survivor. I know how to stretch a dollar until it screams, and looking at these financials," she tossed a folder onto the table. "It seems you boys have been spending money like drunken sailors while the ship is sinking." Silas flushed red. "How dare you? We built this company." "Marcus built this company." Charlotte's voice rose, cracking like a whip. "You just leached off it. I see the expense reports. Private jets to Fiji listed as research. Dinners at Aliena listed as office supplies. You're looting the place." "We are the board of directors!" Silas slammed his hand down. "We can vote you out!" "Actually, you can't." Arthur Pendleton spoke up from the corner. "Mrs. Sterling holds 51% of the voting shares via the trust. She is the board." Silas narrowed his eyes. The dynamic in the room shifted. They realized they couldn't bully her. They had to destroy her. "Fine," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "You want to play CEO? Go ahead. But let me tell you something, little girl. This company is in debt, up to its eyeballs. The creditors are calling. The innovation department hasn't produced a working prototype in 2 years. Because Marcus cut the funding. You have payroll due on Friday. That's $20 million. The accounts have $5 million. If you miss payroll, the union strikes, the stock tanks, and we sue you for fiduciary negligence. You won't just be broke, you'll be in prison." Silas leaned forward, a shark smelling blood. "You have 4 days to find $15 million. Good luck." He stood up and walked out. The rest of the board followed, smirking as they passed her. They were abandoning ship, leaving her to drown. Charlotte sank into the leather chair. She felt nausea rising in her throat. $15 million in 4 days. It was impossible. "Arthur," she whispered, "is it true? Are we that short?" "It appears so," Arthur said grimly. "Marcus's personal cash was drained by Jessica. The company reserves are dry." Charlotte put her head in her hands. Had she fought so hard just to fail? Just to have the twins watch her go to jail? "Mrs. Sterling?" A timid voice came from the doorway. Charlotte looked up. A young man, maybe 25, was standing there. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and thick glasses. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was holding a laptop covered in stickers. "Who are you?" Charlotte asked. "I'm Benji," he said. "Benjamin Cohen. I was the junior lead of R&D, before Silas fired the whole department this morning." "He fired R&D?" Charlotte stood up. "Yeah. He said since you were taking over, they didn't need nerds burning cash. But I heard what you said in there about Marcus." Benji stepped into the room. He looked nervous, glancing at the door as if expecting security to tackle him. "Marcus was the only one who listened to me," Benji said. "Everyone else thought my project was a waste of time. But Marcus, he gave me a budget from his personal account. Off the books." "What project?" Charlotte asked. Benji placed his laptop on the table. He opened it and typed a few commands. A 3D model began to rotate on the screen. It looked like a small, intricate cube. "Project Lazarus," Benji said. "It's a new type of solid-state battery. It charges in 5 minutes and lasts a week. It changes everything. Phones, electric cars, military tech. It's worth billions." Charlotte looked at the spinning cube. "Does it work?" "Yes," Benji nodded enthusiastically. "I finished the prototype last week. I was going to show Marcus, but—" He looked down. The problem is, the prototype is in the Lab 4 vault in the basement. And Silas changed the codes this morning. He locked it down. I think he's planning to steal it and sell it to Omnicorp separately. Charlotte touched the iron key around her neck. Her fingers traced the skull shape. "Pendleton," Charlotte said, a spark lighting in her eyes. "Where is the physical location of the safety deposit box 404? "At the bank downtown," Pendleton said. "No," Charlotte said, her mind racing back to the will. "Administered by the person who possesses the iron key." "And the video," Marcus said. "Use the key." "Clean house." She looked at the key. It wasn't a bank key. It was too old, too ornate. It looked like a key to a dungeon or a vault. "Benji," Charlotte said, "take me to the basement. But the codes." "I don't need a code," Charlotte said, gripping the iron key. "I think I have the master override." They rushed to the elevator. The descent to the basement felt like descending into the belly of the beast. When the doors opened, the hallway was dark. Red emergency lights pulsed. They reached the heavy steel door of Lab 4. There was a digital keypad, flashing red. "Access denied." "See?" Benji said. "We can't get in." Charlotte looked at the door. In the center of the steel, hidden beneath a sliding metal plate that looked like a decorative logo, was a keyhole. It was shaped exactly like the skull on her key. "Marcus didn't trust digital," Charlotte whispered. "He always said, if you want to keep a secret, keep it analog." She slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. She turned it. The heavy tumblers clanked. Thud, 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 echoing like gunshots in the quiet hallway. The door hissed and swung open. Inside, on a pedestal, bathed in blue light, was the prototype. It was real. It was their salvation, but as they stepped inside, the lights in the hallway suddenly flared bright white. "Well, well," a voice sneered from behind them. Charlotte spun around. Silas Thorne was standing there. And he wasn't alone. Two large men in security uniforms stood behind him, and next to him, smirking, was Richard Blight. "I figured you'd find your way down here eventually," Silas said. Marcus always was dramatic with his little keys. "Get out of my way, Silas," Charlotte said, stepping in front of Benji and the prototype. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Silas said. He nodded to the security guards. "Grab the tech. And grab the girl. We're going to have a little accident in the elevator shaft. Tragic, really." The grief-stricken widow jumps. Charlotte backed up, her hand finding a heavy wrench on a workbench behind her. She wasn't the scared wife anymore. She was a mother fighting for her cubs. "You take one step," Charlotte warned, raising the wrench, "and I'll smash this prototype into 1,000,000 pieces. Then nobody gets paid." Silas hesitated. Greed flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't," he growled. "Try me," Charlotte said. "I've lost everything before. I'm not afraid to lose it again." The standoff was electric. 2 wolves, 1 lioness, and $15 million on the line. The basement hallway smelled of ozone and stale air. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans from the server room next door. "You're bluffing," Silas sneered, taking a step forward. "You're a housewife, Charlotte. You don't have the guts to destroy $1 billion. "I'm a mother." Charlotte shot back, her knuckles white around the heavy steel wrench. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Silas didn't listen. He lunged. It happened in slow motion. Silas, despite his size, was fast. He grabbed for the prototype in Benji's hands. Benji yelped, stumbling back, clutching the device to his chest. "Get the device!" Silas roared to the guards. The 2 security guards moved in. Charlotte didn't think. She reacted. She swung the wrench. It connected with the arm of the first guard with a sickening crack. He howled and dropped his baton. But the second guard tackled her. Charlotte hit the concrete floor hard, the air leaving her lungs. The wrench skittered away into the darkness. The guard was heavy. his knee pressing into her back. "Hold her down!" Silas shouted. He had Benji cornered against the open vault door. He ripped the prototype from the young man's hands. "Got it," Silas panted, holding the glowing cube up like a trophy. "Now, let's finish this. Richard, call the cleanup crew. We need to make this look like a break-in gone wrong." Richard Blight, standing by the elevator, pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. "Silas, maybe we should just go. We have the tech. Killing them is necessary." Silas spat. "She knows too much." Charlotte struggled under the guard's weight. She couldn't breathe. She turned her head, her cheek pressed against the cold floor. Her eyes landed on the iron key. It had fallen out of her pocket during the struggle and was lying just inches from her hand. "Use the key," Marcus had said. She stretched her fingers. The guard was distracted, watching Silas. Charlotte's fingertips grazed the cold metal. She strained, inch by inch, until her palm closed around the heavy, skull-shaped iron. She gripped it like a dagger. With a scream of pure adrenaline, she bucked her hips, throwing the guard off balance. As he tried to pin her back down, she swung her hand. The heavy iron key struck the guard in the temple. He grunted, his eyes rolling back, and he slumped off her, unconscious. Charlotte scrambled to her feet. She was bruised, her hair wild, her suit torn. She looked like an avenging angel. Silas turned, startled by the noise. He saw his guard down. He saw Charlotte standing there, the iron key clutched in her fist, dripping with a tiny drop of the guard's blood. "Stay back!" Silas yelled, holding the prototype out. "I'll smash it!" "You won't," Charlotte said, walking toward him. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Because that's your golden parachute. You need that money. I don't." She kept walking. Silas backed up until he hit the wall. "Richard, help me!" Silas screamed. But Richard Blight was looking at his phone. His face was ghostly pale. "Silas," Richard whispered, "we have a problem." "What?" "The elevator?" Richard stammered. "It's moving. Someone called it down." The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. It wasn't the police. It was a wall of blue uniforms. Not security guards. Warehouse workers. Behind them were engineers, secretaries, and janitors. Dozens of them. And, leading them, was Arthur Pendleton. I took the liberty of broadcasting the security feed from this room to the monitors in the lobby, Pendleton said dryly, stepping out. "The entire building just watched you assault the new CEO." The workers surged forward. These were the people whose pensions Silas had threatened. The people who had been ignored for years. They looked furious. "It's over, Silas," Benji said, standing up and adjusting his glasses. Silas looked at the mob, then at Charlotte. He dropped the prototype. Benji caught it before it hit the ground. "You're fired," Charlotte said. Two large men from the warehouse stepped forward, grabbed Silas by his expensive lapels, and dragged him toward the elevator. Richard Blight raised his hands in surrender, whimpering as he was escorted out behind him. Charlotte stood in the center of the chaos, her chest heaving. Arthur walked over and handed her a handkerchief. "That was unorthodox," the lawyer said. Charlotte wiped the dirt from her face. She looked at the workers surrounding her, her army. "Let's get upstairs," she said. "We have a company to save." The victory in the basement was sweet, but the reality upstairs was bitter. By Tuesday, the story was everywhere. Widow fights board member in basement brawl. Sterling tech stock was volatile, bouncing up and down with every rumor. Charlotte sat in Marcus's massive office. It felt too big. Benji was sitting on the couch, running diagnostics on the prototype. Arthur was at the desk, buried in ledgers. "The good news," Arthur said, rubbing his temples, "is that with Silas and Richard gone, we've stopped the active bleeding. The bad news is, we're still short. We need $15 million by Friday for payroll. The banks won't touch us until the fraud investigation on Richard is over." Charlotte looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. "We can't miss payroll, Arthur. These people just saved my life. If checks bounce on Friday, they lose their homes. "We have no liquid cash, Charlotte. None." Charlotte touched the iron key around her neck. She thought about the hot dogs on the park bench. Marcus had started with nothing. "What about the assets?" Charlotte asked. "The real estate is tied up in probate because of Jessica's initial claims. It'll take months to sell," Arthur explained. "Not the houses," Charlotte said. She turned around. "The cars." Arthur blinked. "The vintage collection?" "Marcus loved those cars more than he loved people," Charlotte said. $50 million worth of metal sitting in a climate-controlled garage while families go hungry? Sell them." "Charlotte, that collection is world-famous. It's the crown jewel of the estate. You'd be selling them at a loss for a quick sale." "I don't care," Charlotte said firmly. "Make the calls. Call the collectors. Call the museums. Sell them all. Except one." "Which one?" "The rusted 1968 Ford Mustang," she said. "The one that doesn't run." Arthur smiled. "The one you two went on your first date in?" "That's the one." Wednesday and Thursday were a blur. The Sterling garage sale made international news. Billionaires from Dubai, London, and Tokyo flew in to bid on the Ferraris and Aston Martins. Charlotte oversaw every sale personally. She was ruthless. When a buyer tried to lowball her on a Bugatti, she threatened to crush it into a cube live on television. He paid full price. By Friday morning, the account balance at Sterling Tech sat at $42 million. She processed the payroll at 9 a.m. sharp. At 10 a.m., she called an all-hands meeting in the atrium. She stood on the balcony overlooking the lobby. Thousands of faces looked up at her. "The checks have cleared," Charlotte announced into the microphone. A cheer went up that shook the glass walls. "And," she continued, raising a hand, "effective immediately, we are reinstating the R&D department. Benjamin Cohen is the new Chief Technology Officer." Benji, standing next to her in a cheap suit he clearly bought that morning, waved awkwardly. "We aren't a finance company anymore," Charlotte said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are a family. And nobody messes with this family." As the crowd cheered, Charlotte saw a figure standing near the revolving doors. It was Jessica Vane. She wasn't screaming this time. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, holding a cardboard box. She looked at Charlotte on the balcony, the woman she had called trash, standing at the pinnacle of power. Charlotte met her gaze. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked at her. Jessica looked down, shame coloring her cheeks, and pushed through the revolving door, disappearing into the cold, gray city. 6 months later, the summer sun warmed the grass of the cemetery. It was a stark contrast to the freezing winter day when Charlotte had first met Arthur Pendleton. Charlotte laid a bouquet of white lilies on the black marble gravestone. Marcus Anthony Sterling, innovator. Husband. Father. "The boys are doing well," Charlotte whispered to the stone. "Leo made the soccer team. Sam is already coding better than Benji. They ask about you." She traced the letters of his name. "I forgave you," she said softly. "Not for me, but for them. And thank you for the key." She stood up and turned around. A silver car was waiting on the path. It was the 1968 Mustang, fully restored, gleaming in the sunlight. Leo and Sam were in the back seat, laughing. Benji was in the passenger seat, tapping away on a tablet. Charlotte walked to the car. She looked different now. The worry lines were gone. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, but she carried herself with the grace of a queen. She opened the driver's door and slid in. "Where to, Mom?" Leo asked from the back. "To the office," Charlotte said, starting the engine. It roared to life, a sound of raw power. "We have a meeting with the president about the Lazarus battery." "Can we get ice cream after?" Sam asked. Charlotte smiled, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. She touched the iron key, which now hung from the rearview mirror like a talisman. "We can get whatever we want, boys," she said. "We earned it." She shifted into gear, and the car sped off down the winding road, leaving the past behind, driving toward a future that they had built with their own hands. The mistress had screamed. The board had plotted. The world had judged. But the abandoned wife? She had won. And that is how Charlotte went from a freezing apartment to the CEO's chair, proving that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who holds the keys to the kingdom. I hope you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and redemption. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a drama-filled story. If you were Charlotte, would you have sold the car collection to save the employees, or would you have kept the money for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.